I'm Nick Wagner Sr., and we typically don't do the Full Potential live show on Wednesday nights. We usually do it on Sunday nights. And we usually talk about your career and helping people with their career. But with everything going on, we thought we might try to help tonight. So Dr. Michelle Drapkin, who has actually been on the show before as a guest to talk about her career, messaged me and she's like, hey, I'm a clinical psychologist. I know a thing or two about helping people. Would you like to do a live show where we, go over some different topics to help everyone in this very interesting time that we're currently in? And to me, I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So that was just what, Monday, Michelle? Yeah, that was Monday. So,
yeah, you were ready to go on Monday.
That was Monday. So it is Wednesday. So we are here. So Michelle is willing to take some time and share some of her thoughts with everyone tonight. And we are recording this, so I'll make sure I share this as well. We're on LinkedIn and YouTube. And what we put in the invite was topics we'll talk about tonight. So balancing emotion with reason, values, mindfulness, I'm reading if you can't tell, self and family care, and then overall well-being for individuals and your family. And I think what's interesting right now is, so obviously none of us have been through this, right? Because none of us were around that I know for 1918 and 1919 for the Spanish flu, which was really, I think probably, hopefully we don't get anywhere near that, right? But as far as like this compared to SARS and stuff like that, this seems to be a lot more serious. So no one's really been through this, and I think at this point, people are just kind of frightened and scared and really don't know what to do. So, so as I mentioned earlier, you're a clinical psychologist. I'm sorry, psychologist or psychiatrist? Sorry.
Oh, psychologist. I can't prescribe medicine.
Sorry.
I'm not that kind of doctor.
You're a clinical psychologist. You have your own private practice, and you've been meeting with clients virtually since we're, doing our social distancing. So why don't, share with, maybe just start with the audience, like what are people coming in and asking you about in your sessions, right? That might be different from what you normally talk about. Obviously, you're not going to give away any patient names or anything, but maybe in general, what are people coming and asking you about?
Yeah. So if any of my patients are watching this on recording, I will not disclose any of our information, but this has been a topic for weeks, right? Because ever since it came out, it's slowly trickled in. And so here's what I think is really interesting. So, I'll sort of say, like, first of all, most of what I practice is called cognitive behavioral therapy, and I do a lot of work with anxiety and stress. And the go-to strategy for anxiety and stress is exposure. And so what that means is when you're afraid of something, the go-to strategy is we tell you to approach it, right? Because generally those fears are fairly irrational. You're afraid of flying, we get you on flights, we do simulators, we get you going, you have trouble driving, we get you driving, I get in the car with you, I drive. This is a fear where there is some realistic risk associated with it. And so there isn't a great strategy for how to manage it. And so it's really having conversations with patients about, well, how do you find a wise-minded approach to it? And I think that's a lot of what we've been discussing in sessions, balancing the reason, like the data and the facts, with like the emotion, because there is such an uncertainty, and how do you manage to do that and find, the intersection of those two and find a good spot that feels okay for you. And it's just, it really ranges, and literally like everyone feels pretty concerned about it. And it really, the concerns, I think, fall into two buckets. One is like the health related concerns, which make a lot of sense, right? Like people are worried about getting sick, transmitting it to other people who they care about, who are vulnerable populations. And the other big bucket is financial, right? Like this is really rocketing, like rocking our economy in a really, it's just a really terrible way. And so having small business owners really concerned about the longevity of their business. And I think that's really what a lot of people are dealing with. And so how do you manage those things in a way that doesn't keep you in a state of perpetual stress, which is unhealthy and just sucks, right? Like it sucks to feel that struggle 24/7.
Well, I think you mentioned both health and financial, and I think a lot of people, you obviously talk to a lot of people that have anxiety, and I think a lot of people have anxiety naturally over finances, right? So
Yep.
that's something that I think people worry about without a global pandemic. So throw this on top of it, and the number of people that are, being let go from their jobs or being laid off because of, name the industry they're in, and there's no work, right? Because their store closed or the restaurant closed or whatever, and that throws just, that just, it's your point, ratchets up everyone's level of anxiety even more, on top of also being worried about just getting sick, right? So
Yep.
I think that's a valid point. So I guess my question for you would be, because like the first topic we want to talk about is the whole idea of balancing emotion with reason. What are, I guess my question for you would be, what are some recommendations that you would have on how people kind of work through that exactly, right? How do they work through what are real risks versus not real risks? How do they work through, how do they manage those real risks, right? Like, I guess what's the mindset you recommend to people on how to actually talk their way through some of these things?
Well, so here's the interesting thing, and you brought it up, right? Is we don't have a way of dealing with this, right? This is unprecedented. You talk with anyone who's living, no one has lived through anything like this before. So I have some patients who will come in and say that they'll have talked to like their parents and asked, and they're just like, no, we haven't lived like through anything like this before. It's completely novel. I mean, those of us that have lived through September 11th, and I also really experienced it pretty closely. And I also was in living in the Jersey Shore during Hurricane Sandy. Like, so I have some experience with something similar, but nothing like this, right? It's not like the global level of what. So starting with, like, first of all, accepting that, like, hey, there is no right answer. There is no right way to be dealing with this. There is no right way to be feeling. There is no like very clear cut way to manage, and having some compassion with yourself that you don't really know. And then one of the things we start to talk about is what are the triggers for the anxiety. And I will tell you, and I don't think you'll be surprised, but I don't think anybody would be surprised by this, that a lot of the triggers for anxiety are social media, right? So listening to the news, watching things, there is so much sensationalist stuff that gets put out there. That's what the news do. That's how they sell things. Like, it's just, you have to be careful. And so I'll tell you how I manage that. I don't watch the news generally. I pay attention more to like what the CDC is saying, what the WHO is putting out, and then any like other scientists that I trust, that's who I listen. So I listen for the science. And so we talk a lot about, monitoring what's triggering you and then minimizing those triggers, because you can go crazy all day long getting all of the updates of what's going on. And in the minute you go down those rabbit holes, your anxiety is going to spike and you're no longer rational, right? You're like, now it's just you're feeding the beast of anxiety as opposed to dealing with and managing what's really important to you and what's in front of you.
Well,
and that's another.
I want to add one thing there. I think you bring up a good point. And this, sometimes it's social media for people. Sometimes it's the news. Sometimes it can even be a friend or family member that everyone has one of those friends or family members that is like sending you article after article after article about this happening and this bad news and that bad news. And sometimes you might actually just have to tell someone that you care about, like, hey, I just don't want you to send these things anymore because it's actually making me even more stressed out. And I think that's okay to say that, as long as you go about it and say it the right way and say it with compassion, right?
Right.
Because I think, everyone kind of reacts and deals with things like this differently. So I think that's a really good point.
Right. And there's just kind of that is a great point, because I think a lot of the stress comes from like navigating relationships and different. So here, that's why I mean, there's no right way to stress and there's no way to manage that. Because for some people, they need the data and the information to be able to feel like they're in control, and it helps them, right? But you've got to know what helps you and what hurts you. And sometimes in relationships, whether that's a romantic relationship, like your husband or wife, or it's like a father, someone, everyone deals with things differently. And so you have to really figure out how to take care of yourself and be respectful and have good communication.
Yeah. And I think another thing that is interesting is the way that, the way that I deal with it versus maybe the way that my spouse deals with it could vary, like you said, right? And how we react to things. But I think also, I think we all have to just kind of use the lens of let's assume positive intent and maybe show a little bit more empathy if possible right now, because what you might not think is a big deal, someone else can think is a really big deal. And, just try to show them a little bit more compassion during this time because of everything that's going on. I think is really important. And I know we talked about empathy last time I had you on the show and how I'm not really that good at it, but I'm really trying to be more empathetic with everything going on and seeing how I can, just try to put myself in their shoes of how they may be feeling.
No, so what's really interesting is the idea of like assuming positive intent feels to me like it's huge in like, the HR leadership development space, like more of like corporate America, right? Like you hear that all the time when some of the work I've done consulting there. But I think it's such a great thing that doesn't exactly, like, we don't talk about a lot in other spaces, like assuming positive intent. It drives me bonkers. It actually drives me bonkers in the way that like it worries me that the way we treat our neighbors. So even on social media. So I live in a really small community that I love and I think is doing a really great job. In fact, I'm like super proud of our mayor and the way he's handling it. Like what a great leader. But there are people who will just, lash out at one little thing or make, and they don't assume positive intent. They go after someone really, really quickly. And it just incites, like all of this judgment on both sides. And I even, frankly, I think there's a lot of trepidation and there's a lot of judgment. And I don't think anyone knows how to act, right? Like, so I went to the grocery store today and I was like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. Like, am I supposed to, like, I'm not sure. Like someone would come walk to me. I'm like, am I supposed to, I don't know how to act, right? Like, no one's taught me how to act in the middle of a pandemic where there's social distancing.
Yeah, there's no LinkedIn learning course on
No.
how to act during a global pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I know like 6 feet, right? And I'm like, okay, 6 feet, like, but it's like, I don't know. I'm also not an engineer like my husband. I'm not exactly always sure what 6 feet is. I know I'm almost a little less than 6, so I try and like, okay, but it's, it's an interesting world to be in because I think the reality and part of the reasons why I want to do this webinar and thank you again for like, helping me bring this to life so quickly is I think we're incredibly social beings. And the fact that in fact, I was walking with my daughter today and I was like, all right, we're going, so we're pretty sensitive in our community to supporting small businesses, including the restaurants. And so there's a restaurant that we love down the street. And so we called in for takeout and we were walking together and I said, okay, just remember, like trying to teach her about social distancing as we're going. She's 8 years old. And she's like, but I want to be close to you. And I was like, no, you can be close to me because we lived together. She's like, oh man, like I hate this virus. I hate social distancing. It's like, I can't do anything that like I want to do. Like she's, and I try. So by the way, that's a great point to like, well, what do you do when kids say that? Like you just validate because you know what? It does suck. It is okay to like be angry or disappointed and all of those things. And it's not the way we're cut out as human beings. Even people who are, I don't know if Nick, you identify as being introverted or extroverted, but like there's a lot of introverted people out there who are making jokes and like, oh, this is like I'm living my best life with like social distancing, and frankly, I call bullshit on that a little bit because even if you're an introvert and you really do enjoy kind of being at home and being a homebody, there's a difference in your autonomy between choosing to do that and being forced to.
So I'm an extreme extrovert.
Yeah, as am I.
Hence why I like doing live interviews every Sunday night in my free time. But no, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, there's already studies out there about how lonely people are in general, right? And now let's throw this on top of it, where we're telling people like, hey, you can't go do anything with anyone, right? Like we're closing down all the places where you would typically socialize, as in, restaurants and, bars and bowling alleys and, malls and name the location. Right. So I think it's to your point, I think it's causing people that are extroverts to really be, I think, they're just seeking out ways to interact with people, right? Which is why using video like this, like we're lucky that this is happening and we actually have the internet still, right? And we actually have ways of communicating with technology. Because imagine if we didn't have, webcams and FaceTime and cell phones and video chat, right? This would be even harder. So I think you bring up a great point.
Yeah, and I think that I can't remember if you and I talked about this, but I talked about this with a lot of people in corporate America who are used to being on camera quite often. Like I've worked remotely in various positions, and I'm used to being on camera. It's not that big of a deal to me. Like I'm very comfortable. A lot of people aren't as comfortable on camera. They don't know what to do. They don't know how it feels. And so actually I have a lot of patients who have some trepidation about doing telehealth. And it's not the security, because I use a secure platform. It's more of, well, I'm not sure, it's going to feel kind of funky. And they don't have the privacy, right? So like that's a whole other issue we could talk about, is finding privacy in your house, which I think probably is a source of, because there's that piece of, if you live alone, you're going to be hyper lonely and isolated. If you live in a family, you're going to be like over inundated with it's like you have to find that balance for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is, and I was talking about this with my wife, at least it's not January and the kids can go outside and run around, right? And go out, we can all go outside and take walks and bike rides, and that actually helps, right? I think immensely.
But for now.
For now.
So you and shelter in place, right? So it is, and I think that's where, let's talk about that for a second, because I think there is this sort of, so do you see, I even just did it, right? I'm not living in the moment. I'm worrying about the future. And I think that's the thing, is we can only worry about the future so much because we just don't know. And there's so much stuff, it's changing every day. And so like every day I wake up and something has changed, even in my own town, or how things are being handled. And it's pretty scary, right? And so but I think about those things of, well, that is a worst case scenario, and so I need to make my home as enjoyable as possible for me, and I need to have built in some of those spaces that I need, but it is a possibility that could come down the pipeline. And so how do we all survive in what could be like essentially us living in like sheltering in placing, like in San Francisco for 3 weeks? That's pretty intense.
I know that's true, because they're doing that in some parts of the country. I want to talk about something you just mentioned. So, how do you focus on the things that you can control versus worrying about things that you can't control? Right? Is there in your world of your own practice and everything you've studied and been taught? Are there strategies to do that? Because I feel now is probably the most important time to do that. Because if you start thinking about the macro scale of things, right, you could really get yourself bound up pretty quickly.
Yep.
So how do you focus on what you can control versus the macro situation? What's your thought there?
So I think that there are two things that come to mind. One is mindfulness, right? And if I haven't preached mindfulness enough, or as Dan Harris of 10% Happier will say, like evangelizing mindfulness and meditation, I think that is like the easiest thing. If you haven't tried it, now's a great time to try it. You have plenty of time. If you're at home, there's not a lot going on. What I love that I see that like especially the tech world is doing is really giving out tons of like free services and free, like they're just really supporting people. And like, so try mindfulness and meditation, keep like, and check. And then what that enables you to do is check yourself. Where is my head at? Is it actually in this moment? And then you can like kind of lean into and notice your body, right? Like figuring out, well, when I'm stressed, like for me, if I'm stressed, sometimes I don't breathe. Like eventually I breathe, but I catch myself like holding my breath. Or, my shoulders are really tight. I'll get like stress headaches. It's knowing your body, being aware of it, and trying to keep yourself as present in the moment as you can. And like do you do any mindfulness or meditation?
So I would say my meditation is probably working out. I know that's not real meditation, but my way. That's like, for me, I think it's whether either it's running or going to the gym. Well, now working out in the basement. It's like that physical release of of exercising is what it does it for me.
Yeah.
I don't sit still a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think I remember you saying that. But listen, this might be a good opportunity for you to read 10% Happier, which is Dan Harris's book about mindfulness and meditation. But I think if we could all just take a second, right? And so right now, take your foot and make sure it's on the ground. And if it's this, I'll teach you a little grounding real quick, right? To just bring you into the moment. And if you really feel both your feet on the ground, and if you pay particular attention to one of your feet and just feel it connected to the ground, like really feeling where it meets the ground, whether it's in a shoe or a sock, but really just feeling that sensation of being connected to the ground, being present in this moment. Just that one. And so just being grounded. And then you can really just push your pinky toe down and move one toe at a time all the way to your big toe. And just noticing that you have these toes that are connected to your foot and connected to the ground. Right? And that's really just pulling yourself out of your head and into your body and then into this very moment. And that's one strategy, really, to just be aware of when you're ruminating about stuff you can't control. Because most of what we're ruminating about is most likely stuff we can't control. Like, we can't actually control the spread of the virus. We're doing our best.
Right.
And we believe that social distancing is going to really help with that. And so we're each doing our part. But again, I don't know. Did I contribute to the spread of the virus when I went to the grocery store today? I don't know. But I did my best to control what I could within those circumstances. And so I had some healthy acceptance that I was going to do my best, but I wasn't staying home. I literally was out for like 20 minutes and back, but I had to. So here's the other thing we should talk about. So by the way, how was that grounding before I talk about values? Because I want to go there.
I think one thing I'd love you to explain is the whole idea of mindfulness. Why has it been proven to work, right? At actually helping people. What is it that actually helps you, like either relax or maybe realize what's actually going on a little bit more? What's the science behind it?
So it's really an attention training. So I like to think of it as intentional attention, where a lot of what happens to us happens outside of our attention, right? So, people used to think about this as unconscious. And some people do. They still think that there's a lot of that happens automatically. Mindfulness brings that into our attention and allows us to have a little bit more awareness and then make decisions about how we interact with that. So when you're sometimes, I don't know if so actually my favorite example is if you're driving along and you hear what you think is a police siren, what usually happens to you?
Usually your heart rate goes up.
Yeah, your heart rate clench. You might clench the steering wheel.
Yeah.
I look for oh my gosh, do I have my PBA card? And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, it was just the radio, right? But do you see how quickly that happens in our mind? It's just really I think it's awesome, right? Our brains are so amazing. They function so quickly, but that helps us to be reactive in some circumstances. In others, it's just not effective, right? It actually is overkill. Did I really need for my heart to tighten and for me to be ready to run and fight a lion because I thought there was a police car coming, right? Do you see so mindfulness allows you to be aware of some of those automatic processes and to manage them better. So to make some decisions about, I'm having this experience, and then what do I do with it? By the way, a lot of people think, well, if I have the thought, then and mindfulness allows me, then I can push it away. We don't think you need to push it away. We think you just need to let it be, and just kind of let it be. And you don't even have to have a reaction to it. It's just, oh, there's a thought. my mind's pretty amazing. It has all these like anxious thoughts, it has these happy thoughts. And if I'm being mindful, I can choose which of those thoughts to give my attention to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that, that does make sense. I think that helps people just because I think people, a lot of people hear about mindfulness, but don't really have probably never heard that explanation of it. Um, and I think, obviously all the work you do is tied so much to research and how the brain functions, right? So, and I think a lot of things is, I think to your point with the police story, it is natural for us to be feeling anxious during a global pandemic. That is probably a pretty normal reaction, right? Based off of how we're wired. I think what we're trying to do by, having this conversation and trying to educate people is how do you make sure that how do you make sure that the fear and your anxiety doesn't paralyze you where you actually can't you can't live life, right? Because a lot of us that are listening right now or going to listen to the recording have responsibilities, right? It could be they have a spouse, it could be they have kids, it could be they have elderly parents that they need to take care of because they're in that really age where they don't want them going to the grocery store, right? So we all have different responsibilities, and we want to make sure that we can all kind of handle those during something like this, so just so that anxiety doesn't paralyze us. That's kind of what I'm thinking as we have this conversation.
No, and I think that's the thing is like how helpful is it, right? To like worry all day long. So the other strategy I was going to mention is sometimes we'll talk about, writing your worries out, talking about them. There's some data that actually supports it. Actually, talking to other people, like but it actually like I'm having some like anxiety right now. This is starting to like panic me. And then the other thing is like if you're finding yourself thinking about it all time, is time boxing it, right? Like I don't know if you practice time boxing for anything else, but a lot of us do, right? We're just those of you that don't know, the idea of time boxing is like you literally schedule a box of time in your schedule to do whatever it is. Like I'm sitting in my basement and we're getting ready to do renovations whenever that will happen in the current pandemic. But so I might be over the next couple weeks or next week or so time boxing, cleaning up the basement and getting stuff like out. But you can time box anxiety, right? I could say, hey, like this is really stressing me out. If I said to you, stop worrying, stop doing it, you probably would push back and say, like, but I have to worry. Like if I don't worry, there's something wrong with me or I'm not care. I need some level, I need to know, I need some level of getting the news. I need to like look at this. And so then we talk about, okay, great, let's schedule some time for you to worry. And that way you have permission to do that and you can do other things to make you feel good before and after. But it's like, I can worry about that later because I time boxed it for later, right? It's like almost like working on a project. Like I have to get at this project. Okay, I'm going to work on that between 4 and 5. I got it. I'll get it done. No big deal.
And you could probably use that same philosophy on, hey, I'm only going to check the news at lunch when I eat, and then at 5 before when I'm done working for the day, right? Like same type of thing, right? So you're not constantly doing it. I know some people do that with social media as well. I think another thing that I wanted to ask you is, because I think a lot of people are really struggling right now. I think just across the globe, right, are really struggling with anxiety and what's going on. At what point do you actually call a professional like yourself because you actually need to talk with someone, right? So how do you? I mean, obviously everyone's different, but like in your opinion, like what are some signs that like maybe you do want to actually engage with a licensed professional because it is paralyzing you or it is preventing you from doing your job or taking care of your kids, et cetera?
Yeah, well, so that's exactly it. So I'm a clinical psychologist and generally deal with issues that interfere with life, right? And so that's really the hallmark is, listen, everybody has worry, everybody has fear, everybody feels sad sometimes, like it all happens, but it's when it really impacts your life in a noticeable way. And I would say for this particular one, what I would be looking out for is how's your sleep? Like sleep is always huge. My colleague, Dr. Michael Grandner, will be happy that I mentioned sleep. He's a big sleep expert and really preaches how important it is. But that's one thing, like, are you getting enough of it? Is it good quality? Are you finding yourself ruminating? So thinking about it over and over again before you go to bed, waking up in the middle of the night, waking up early in the morning, and what's going on there? And so what is the quality of your sleep, but also the quantity? And I would be tracking that. Like you don't want to be exhausted during times like these. You want to take good care of yourself. And, we could talk, probably one of the things we should talk about is how to like maintain like sanity in a second. Right. And in my mind, that would include maintaining a schedule. Cause it's pretty easy to get slippery when, I don't really have to go to school or work tomorrow. Like I'm just, trotting down to the basement, it's like, oh, I'm going to stay up until however, but so watch your sleep. The other thing I would watch is substances. So are you like, and when I say substances, I say like across the board, nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, of course, marijuana, any other substances, benzodiazepines. Just watch what you're intaking. And if there's an uptick, I would worry that, particularly alcohol is still pretty easily accessible. I would watch that, right? Like if you're drinking to cope with the anxiety, that's going to get you into really bad habit going forward. I'm even worried about my own caffeine intake because it's just I'm home and I'm a lot more lax and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm gonna come out of this with a wicked caffeine addiction. And so would I seek psychological help for that? No, but I'm noticing and being intentional about how I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah, and I think also having those people around you that you care about, I think having that conversation with them, I think is really important, right? So whether it's a spouse or a significant other or a family member or a friend, just kind of like, hey, if you notice something not really right about me, or I might be acting differently, like let me know, right? I mean, I think it's important to have people watch out for each other in times like this, or specifically try to make sure, like ask each other, like, hey, how you doing? Or I called my brother today and was like, hey, how's everything going? I just want to make sure you're okay, and just check in. No specific reason, just was checking in to see how he was doing.
Yeah.
My hope is that through the goodness of people, we can get through this. And, we're going to have to look out for each other more than we have in the past, which I know is not something people always like to do, but I think now we really have to do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's talk about values for a second, right? Because I think that's another important thing of like, what are your values and how do you stay values consistent in the time of this pandemic, right? And so what's really important to you? And if community, I mean, this is something like I've been really struggling with, like contributing to my community. And and so thank you, Nick, because you're helping me live into my values tonight as I was feeling kind of like helpless. Like meaning like, oh, I can help people, but like I don't know how because I'm like stuck at home, right?
Yeah.
And like that's a value of mine, is really helping people, and connecting with people is another value. So how do I still fill those buckets in the context? And so we might have to be creative. So I love my community. I love the place, the city that we live in. And so today, one of the things I did, because I was like, oh, again, like how do I connect with community that I'm not allowed to touch or really see, right?
Yeah.
And we have a little free library that's in front of our house, and so I was really struggling. I'm like, can I keep my little free library open during the pandemic? And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go. I'll sanitize it. I'll fill it up with new books. I'll let people know that it's open. I even put out extra books so like kids could come by, right? Because libraries are closed. And to me, that was living into my values. And to me, that keeps me energized and engaged, and feeling like, I'm still contributing, which is important to me. And so that's another place. If you feel like you're avoiding or isolating beyond the social distancing, right? There's sort of a difference between me staying home and me isolating in a corner and not connecting with people. Then I also would think about, well, that's a trigger to reach out to a professional. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. There's lots of people like me who are working remotely, but there's also like apps and all kinds of stuff where you can access help now, even text lines. If you're feeling suicidal or feeling really alone, you can text 741-741. And I think you should. I think this is a time where there is not a handbook like written for how we should be doing this. And so you just need to be mindful, present, and acknowledge what's going on with yourself. And if you think there's something off, then there probably is, and get someone to help you out with it.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, and I said this to someone that we have to besides assuming positive intent and giving people the benefit of the doubt that they've never been through this before, and especially those that are making decisions like within your local communities or your the state level or whatever. Like, we've never done this before, right? So we have to people are trying their best, is my point. But I think the other really key thing here is when you think about what everyone's experiencing, everyone's going to experience this differently. And the reality is you're probably going to end up knowing someone that gets COVID-19, right? I mean, I think that's just the chances are pretty high. So when that happens, not if, but when, don't make them feel even more isolated, right? Don't, they're already going to feel probably bad enough that they got it because they don't know who else they gave it to. They're obviously going to be sick, but like, how can you support that person going through that situation, right? Is another thing to think about. And how do you support someone that actually does get it? Not just physically, but also mentally, right? Because they might be exactly what we talked about earlier. They could be thinking, oh my gosh, I have this. Who else did I give it to? Right. And then that's going through their head. So I think there's just so much that we can do to help each other now, which is why I was so excited that you wanted to do this, do this show and try to give back, because you have this great gift of, what you do every day where you can help people. And I love, some of your suggestions on, mindfulness and, maybe meditation or getting an app or, I think or ultimately calling someone like yourself, calling a professional and talking through. And I think there's, I think no one should feel ashamed that they're scared or anxious or they don't know an answer or they need to talk to someone, or like no one's done this, right? So no one should feel ashamed that they feel a certain way going through this. We all just have to do our best right now, I think, is the point.
Yeah, no one knows, right? Like, our leaders don't know. Like, everyone is just really doing their best, exercising an abundance of caution, and really trying to. A lot of what we're doing is to help, like, the greater good, right? That even, I mean, I don't have any kind of underlying health condition, so if I got it, the data suggests that it wouldn't be terrible for me. And that goes for my immediate family, but I don't want to be responsible for passing it to someone who, would get deathly ill. And so I feel really a social obligation to social distance. And so again, it's a value. And so I think about that. Do I feel like frustrated that I'm social distancing? I mean, a little bit sometimes, but I'm also grateful and feel really privileged that I can do this, and I can, it's not ruining my life yet. I mean, maybe talk to me in like 4 weeks and I might be like bouncing off the wall. But I think it's, it's just, we have to just stay in the moment. And so again, if I think ahead 4 weeks, oh my gosh, this would be really awful. But if I think about every hour or every day and I just keep my head in that, like, it's actually not that bad, right? And I know, like, I don't mean to invalidate anyone. And I also know that my circumstances are probably pretty different. I do worry about people who are home and stuck in situations where it's just not healthy, right? And so, thinking about how do you care for yourself within those situations, making sure you're getting outside or exercising. This is something, by the way, behavioral activation is proven to lift mood. And so that doesn't necessarily mean exercising, but exercising is great. And so for those of us, I had gotten into a really good routine of going to the gym, and I knew it was going to come, right? I knew the gyms were going to close, and I was like, oh, this is going to be horrible. I'm going to get off my routine. I'm going to be so unhealthy when this is over. And I just, I made the decision that that's not going to happen. I'm going to wake up every day. I'm going to do some kind of activity. Thank you to Peloton, who gave a 90-day free subscription, and you can do like floor exercises and yoga. I also worked for Johnson and Johnson, and we have the 7 Minute app, and my friend Chris Jordan is like featured on it. So it's like I work out with Chris, but you've got to keep your body moving, and that'll really help a lot with your well-being as well. And so really taking care of your physical self as well, and being present with that. So when you're running, like, are you actually running? Like, is your mind in the run, right? Or are you ruminating, thinking about what you have for your day and planning for that's a great activity or opportunity to really be present with the run or go for a mindful walk. And even if we're stuck inside, you can do some of that walking or activities right in your living room or basement.
And I know you would say that, getting enough sleep and quality sleep and eating well and exercising are things that you should always do, even when there is the global pandemic. I know you would say that because
Yeah.
they're good for you. But I think what
Yep.
your point here is, it's probably even more important to, have a routine, have a schedule, and do those things, because in order to keep some sense of normalcy in this non-normal situation we're going through, we're creatures of habit, and that should actually help us probably, feel a little bit better about the situation, kind of having this schedule and doing all these things that are good for ourselves.
Yeah, and it's defining the new normal, right? What does life look like now, and how do I make sure that the new normal includes aspects that are going to help me with my well-being, so my vitality and my strength. My social connectedness too is a huge part of well-being. And so how do we really do that intentionally too? And that's something I've been thinking about, is I don't want to just have my interactions be mostly my husband and my daughter. Here we are on a Wednesday night. But I've also tried to connect with, like, I had a great meeting this afternoon with like one of my old mentors from San Diego, who I really was grateful that he and I got on video.
Yeah.
And like, it was like we were hanging out for a half hour. And so do stuff like, I think the net is, you need to be intentional, and you need to think about what you need. And really, like, I always talk about taking your temperature, taking your pulse, like, just ask like, how are you doing? And if you're in a relationship, if you have anyone who's out, do that for each other. Hey, like, how are you doing? How can I help you? Like, what are you missing? Is there something that can bring you more comfort or joy that we can do within these circumstances? And so it's sort of accepting the bounds, and being creative within those. And so this is an opportunity in some ways to be creative. And I love, earlier today, I was out, walking with my daughter. We're coming home, and our neighbors, I think it breaks my heart that college kids are home, right? That sucks for them, especially seniors who are going to graduate, right? Like,
Yeah, no, I know.
it sucks, but they're home and they're out in the street playing soccer with their dad. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. And they're like, yeah, it's just like when we were kids. And I'm like, this is awesome, right?
Yeah.
Like, there could be some really amazing silver linings to what we're about to experience. And I almost caught myself saying endure, right? And if we put that label of endure onto it, then it is us. We're leaning into the suffering and saying this is going to be hard. If we just sort of say, hey, we're going to experience something new and different, I really don't know what it's going to be like. So let me just kind of like bring a beginner's mind to it and just see like what it's going to be like and how I can make it, new and different, and maybe exciting, maybe joyful, maybe more values driven. Maybe I'm going to figure out stuff that I didn't know about myself or my family, or what we can do together. And, maybe there's some great stuff that comes out of this mayhem.
Yeah. And I think, and, just like in closing, I think some of the takeaways are obviously, continue to take care of your body and mind, right? More so, it's even more important now than when we don't have something like this going on. Try to find the positive in everything that you're experiencing, right? Like you just said, could you reconnect with someone that you haven't connected with in a while? Maybe you get to play a board game with a family member you haven't played a board game with in a long time, right? So, how do you find those positives in everything going on? How do you connect to those people that maybe you haven't connected with, in quite some time? And I think, I think the connecting with people, especially whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, is so important to kind of just keep your mind going, but also to make sure that you don't end up being lonely, right? I think you bring up a really good point. I'm in a house with a wife and 3 kids, a cat and a dog, but there are some people that are living alone, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
you're a younger person or no matter the age, especially elderly people, that can get pretty lonely pretty quickly. So use technology to interact with people. Assume positive intent, try to help each other, and then just remember that if you really need to talk with someone, there are professionals like yourself out there that can help you, right? And that, luckily, again, we can do telehealth, right? And we can have a session right through video, or if they don't want to do video, right over the phone, with audio, and to talk with a professional like yourself. So I just want to say thank you for making time tonight.
Thank you.
I really hope this helped a bunch of people. I know we had a bunch of people watching live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and then we'll release the recording on YouTube and LinkedIn tomorrow. And hopefully someone can, find some good in our conversation. And if you want to get a hold of Michelle, she is on LinkedIn, so you can just look her up. It's Michelle, and the last name I'll just spell it is Drapkin. So you can find her. And I think that has all the links to your private practice and everything if you want to get in touch with you on anything going on.
My door is always open. I don't have a lot going on, so feel free to reach out, and happy to chat. And wishing you all well, and hopefully you find some joy within this chaos.
Well, I appreciate you, as an expert, taking time to do this, because I think it is important, to your point, where those of us that are blessed and are able to give back right now, because we all need to chip in to help the greater good. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Michelle.
Bye-bye.